And welcome to Tech Load. Sandra Spencer here. And lined up for you for the next hour, tech headlines, news, info, music and insights into the world of tech trends and what to look for with emerging technology. What is the intersection looking like today for emerging tech and businesses, and what is to come with global disruptive technologies and the impact on new business, market competition, governments and the world you live in? Coming up, a technology advisor and commentator to discuss clear vision for disruptive, chaotic tech pathways. We'll be with you shortly.
The sounds of the Bayside, 88.3 Southern FM.
And you're tuned into Tech Load. On the studio line is Ben Reid, Director of Bemiya, Technology Advisor and commentator. A big warm welcome all the way from New Zealand. How are you, Ben?
I'm fine. Fine, thank you, Sandra. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, sorry about that. It was a tech failure. So now let's look at a tech success. You picked Bjork's Human Behaviour just there. You've got a good tech music memory. What is it?
Tech music. I don't have so much a tech music memory, but that song, that was just, the Bjork's an amazing musician and artist, and that was the debut, that was the opening track on her debut album. And I just remember watching her at the Brixton Academy in London, and we'd been waiting and waiting for her to come on, and then that drum beat, the snare sample that we just heard, just came on, and then suddenly this little elfin figure races across from the left side of the stage to the other side of the stage, all the way into the curtains, and then races all the way back to the other side of the stage, and then races to the microphone right in the middle, and just hits the microphone just as exactly as the
really, and just because she can. I've seen her perform live too in London.
Yeah.
And so, in terms of technology and the sound sampling, this goes back to the 90s, and so she may have been ahead of her time. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, she was. She had a very unique sound, and there were bands, British bands at the time. Portishead is one, Massive Attack as well to a degree, who were, experimenting with using sort of more organic, more, acoustic samples, I think. She's just an incredible artist who just, keeps innovating, and, mixing traditional music genres with, some of the latest technology. New instruments, I've seen her do concerts with completely new electronic instruments as well. So someone I respect hugely. This is an innovator, and he's someone that's using technology, as a creative tool.
Yeah, and you have a background as a musician, so you were a member of a punk folk music band. So, do you have any skills?
Long time ago.
Do you have any skills from your music days that you've put to good use for your technology work today?
That's a fascinating question. So look, I played and composed jazz and music on the piano mainly, but so I think music is very mathematical, and I think if you some of the outlets that you get to create sort of music and compose music and play music do definitely translate to my career background, which was sort of writing software. And so, I think over time, just as I was getting more into a software development career back in the day, I definitely, found a lot more about a creative outlet, I guess, in the software I was writing rather than, making music.
Right.
So I think that there's definitely some kind of analogy there between the way a sort of mathematical musical
so in software, a lot of people, don't really realize, but software engineering can be like just hugely creative, creating things out of nothing.
It's hugely creative. And, the best software is creating something completely new that wasn't there before, that you've had to imagine and structure and plan and realize. And
so you're self-taught. Now, how do you think that's influenced how you see and use technology today and how you advise on it?
So it's an interesting, question, and I am very much sort of autodidactic. Yeah, so I tend not to learn particularly well in sort of structured, I guess lecture environments and so on. So I think that's when you think about how the bleeding edge of technology is always changing and evolving, and and I sort of gravitated towards that, I think, because you can't learn that because no one's had the time to put a course together. So it's always about exploring the edge, I think, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so in terms of tech advancement, what do you think technologists and business leaders need to know and understand about human behaviour? Because Bjork just said human behaviour can lead to a lot of confusion. So how can we lessen the confusion, and what do technologists and business leaders need to know about human behaviour?
About human behaviour? Well, that's an interesting one. So, I think traditionally organisations have been built quite hierarchically, and you look at traditional organisational charts is definitely this sort of hierarchical sort of chief executive at the top, and then a management layer, and then sort of worker bees throughout the org. I think increasingly what we're finding is there are better ways and more productive, agile ways to run teams, and a lot of that is just enabled by collaborative tools and more sort of agile, I guess,
methodology.
Methodologies,
and processes. And so, I hear a lot of comments from some, business leaders that the Zoom conference calls and with the remote way of working that people have been placed in during COVID-19, that they've been actually quite impressed that they've been able to involve a lot more people in certain discussions and meetings, and how beneficial that has been to the projects.
I think it's been transformative, and I think it's a change that's really, it's obviously it was happening anyway, but I think it's been accelerated hugely by the various lockdowns around the world. And just to remember that in New Zealand we have been lucky to have eliminated the virus. I know that in Victoria, where you are, and across Australia, it's pretty much eliminated as well. And we're able to maybe go back to the office, but there's whole swathes of the rest of the world where they're still in long-term lockdown, and so have to work from home. Actually, I was just there's an excellent article by a New Zealand CTO, Owen Evans, that I was just commenting on today in my newsletter, and he talks about we've got to stop calling it remote working, because where is it actually remote from anymore? It's actually distributed working or resilient working.
I quite like that. Distributed working or resilient working. And of course, for many, it's just like the way we're working today. Myself included, and many people have been working like this, conference calls, video calls, or whatever, for like more than a decade.
So it feels like the rest of the world's finally caught up, right?
Yeah, totally.
and I've spent a lot of my career on a plane, and sort of just flying around various places to be in the same city as the clients I'm working with. And this year's been, I would say, actually completely transformative, because the amount of time that I've sort of reclaimed from just being able to communicate virtually. I think I don't think I'd really want to go back. And I think there's a lot of people, as you were saying, have actually discovered this is a better way to work. And so I think businesses that are intent on forcing people back into the office when vaccines arrive or whatever, I'm not sure that that everybody will want to go back. And they may look for companies that are offering more flexible.
Well, they'll be looking for choices and a bit more flexibility. But if we look at human behaviour, I think also a lot that has come out of what I'm reading and from business leaders that I'm speaking with and working with, they're saying that there still is a real need for face-to-face and sort of in contact for teams and for clients and for projects, because different things come from that real life interaction in terms of the way people behave and in terms of how they can collaborate.
I sit on the sceptical side of the fence with that. I don't know if there's any hard data to back that up at the moment. I think there's definitely people that prefer a more in-person, almost command and control way of managing things, and I know that workers do like to get together with their colleagues, and you do get sort of higher bandwidth relationships, when you are physically next to each other. But in terms, I think a lot of that is going back to what I was saying about the agile methodologies and proper tools, collaboration tools that actually enable. One of the people I'm working with at the moment on a project, we've developed this way of working where she will just do a sort of like 3-minute screencast of where she's just finished up on the task that she's doing. And so, a quick demo around the software, and, this bit does that bit does that. And what I need from you now, Ben, is this, this, and this. And then she'll sort of sign that off. And then when I'm ready, I can just pick that up. And then, give it my full attention. And, it takes, 10, 15 minutes to turn that around and then send back as well.
Yeah, look, it really depends. I mean, you can't compare all the projects and all the industries and all the tasks and all the job roles as a blanket generalization. It's simply won't work.
Yeah, there are obviously some jobs where you need to be, next to some very heavy machinery. That's not mobile.
I suppose it is also just for many. There is that sort of satisfaction of being in person, to sort of be with people on the physical, to do their work, and then I think it's very different. When people are just placed, in their own surroundings day after day. It's a very different proposition.
Yeah, and look, I think we've got a lot to learn, to develop better, working from home practices in terms of not booking, half-hour Zoom directly after half-hour Zoom, so you sort of come up for air 4 hours later and been sitting there. So I think there's definitely some well-being aspects.
Yeah, a good massage chair, I suppose, and then some augmented reality as well, and some sensory technology around you to sort of create a bit more ambience and a bit more aliveness. Yeah, I think people also respond quite well to change, and because they behave differently when their environment is changing.
Yeah, so I think where this is going, and I think the other reason that I'm pretty confident that we're not going to all be going back to the office in the long run is just the advances that are happening now with virtual reality and mixed reality, and so mixed reality is really the ability to sort of it's sort of like augmented reality but overlaid with sensors as well. So it sort of detects your environment around you. So, I think pretty soon, there's a bunch of headsets out there now that are approaching, human eye fidelity to make it what's virtual in your field of vision to have the same resolution, the same fidelity as something that you're looking at.
Totally. I mean, they're getting closer. There's also some, a lot of comments that have come out that people with an introverted personality and character disposition seem to really enjoy a lot more the whole remote working proposition, whereas the people that seem to have suffered most in the personal and social and working environments are actually the more extroverted people.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I think I don't know how you deal with that in some way. I mean, in some ways, so it was very uncomfortable, I think, for a number of people with a sort of introverted personality to be forced into a quasi-social environment, every day, and so on. So I think it's certainly identified options.
Yeah,
for,
totally.
More diverse personality types. Yeah.
Yeah, where they can sort of do a good fit for the project, the industry, and the people involved. So really quickly before we go to a break, what do you love about tech?
What do I love about tech? Look, I've been involved with tech. So, as I say, I sort of taught myself software programming. I grew up in a rural part of England a long time ago. And I had a Apple IIe was my first computer, and so there wasn't a huge amount to do, except I sort of sat down and just learned to program on that. And I was always just very curious. I always find there's just lots to explore, lots that you don't know. I've just got a curious mind, and so I think for me it's a cross between curiosity and just imagination. So it comes back to that creativity we were talking about at the beginning.
In your roots as a musician with a structured mathematical musical mind.
Yeah, it possibly goes back to that. But I've certainly, a lot of the work that I do with customers now is about imagining what you could do with some of this new technology that's coming through. And it may not be, production ready for 5 more years, but just imagine the possibilities.
To get those thought processes in line and, if you do give some sort of strategic guidance.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about surprises? Anything that surprises you about technology?
constantly surprised. I think,
surprised that you're in it.
Yeah, I say I write a weekly newsletter that is actually part of my process. I think just to keep learning about all the changes that are going on. So I sort of constantly reading, and so every week in the newsletter there's something that I had, it's what we call a weak signal from the future. So it's a sort of signal something that's happening now that could potentially, give an indication of what, how the future could be, a future scenario. The one today that really surprised me was the story of a Russian, and it's a story from about 6 months back, but a Russian physicist who's developed this gravity impulse machine that which travels. The gravitational impulses are propagating at 64 times the speed of light, according to his experiments. And so
that's pretty heavy.
It's pretty heavy,
fast.
right? And so, well, it completely sort of bends our understanding of conventional physics.
And what's the purpose?
Such as we have it.
What's his point?
He's an experimental physicist, so that is the purpose. Science, yeah. Totally.
And any fears about technology?
I probably sit on the very much the techno-optimist side. One of the things I'm very aware of is, I'm probably a technophile, and I quite like change. I'm sort of always have my head in the future a lot of the time. I'm aware that I'm much more optimistic about this stuff than others. But generally, I think there's this kind of like Darwinian algorithm that's going on through all of this. It's just evolution. And so for every advance in technology, that technology could be used for good purposes, or it could be used for malicious purposes as well. Mm-hmm. But, the technology is evolving at the same time. And so it's sort of like, the primordial ooze way back in the day, or any other evolutionary event, is for every advance on one side of that equation, there'll be an equivalent advance. So someone develops a new computer virus, and someone, works out a way to counter that virus, and effectively vaccinate against it.
And we call that evolution.
Yeah, I would call it. I think it's just exactly an extension of genetic evolution. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
I think there's a lot of conversation in the AI community around existential risks, particularly from creating superhuman AI, and the concept, that concept of
will we cease to exist, and will there be singularity?
yeah, heading off into singularity, and again, I'm probably much more sanguine than others on that. Possibly not. There's a lot of deep academic research and theory on it, and sort of there's an author, Nick Bostrom, out of Oxford, who's sort of covered pretty much every scenario where an AI technology could potentially present an existential threat to humanity.
So we've been forewarned, along with some of the great writers of our time. When we come back, we'll talk about your involvement with the AI Forum in New Zealand. And you're listening to Tech Load. And on the studio line is Ben Reid, Director of Bemiya, Technology Advisor and Commentator. So, Ben, what is Bemiya and why this name?
So Bemiya is a consulting firm that I sort of run, and we, sort of small. Just had a bit of music there. We sort of like work around New Zealand, Australia, and a little bit into Asia, just working with organisations of all shapes and sizes. From the large software companies right down to some of the smaller startups, and do some work with public sector agencies as well. The main part of our work is, technology strategy advisory. So this is helping organisations to, keep track of, emerging technologies and changing technologies as they are coming through, to really sort of help them to integrate that into their business strategy, their growth strategy as well.
Yeah. And what's
so that's what I do. Your question about where the word comes from. It's a play on the word meme. So M-E-M-E. And everybody these days sort of knows what a meme is. It's an infectious little idea that bounces around the internet and people share. But the original use of the word was by biologist Richard Dawkins. way back in the 70s, his book, The Selfish Gene. And so I set up Bemiya in the UK sort of 25 years ago. So this is showing my age. But and so his definition of a meme is as a sort of effectively a unit of life, and analogous to a gene that is
selfish. The selfish gene. So how ironic is this?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and his model of life was that all life are basically copying machines for genes. Which is obviously we look at it as we're the center of the universe, but he sort of frames it as actually the genes are driving force behind evolution. And a meme is an analogous unit of information that but it's continually copying itself from people's minds, from one mind to another, and transmitted. So in the way that we're just talking right now. And communicating that idea of a meme, and then someone may then create something on the internet that gets shared out to 1 million people or a billion people. So it's interesting theory. It captured my imagination way back in the day, and that's just called my company that.
Yeah, and so what projects are you working on now?
So I've got a very varied portfolio. So we, I think some of the interesting work we've been doing is just with a number of exporters. So a lot of exporters on this side of the Tasman, we're obviously quarantine borders. And so, the traditional way of getting out into market basically sort of selling your product, going to a trade show and so on, has, fallen by the wayside, not been able to do it. So sort of working with businesses and, working on some digital strategy pieces there. So, using existing digital marketing technologies to, get attention and to raise awareness out in the market, but also looking at some more innovative uses, like we were talking about, virtual reality, augmented reality earlier on, ways that you can potentially, sort of capture your customers' imaginations, with those tools as well. What's some other stuff that I've been doing? I think, I've been working with we have a number of sort of research organisations here, that do agricultural research, for example. And they, it's really interesting. That's a field that works on a really long time frame, right? So to create a new plant varietal, for, say a kiwi fruit or an apple or something, is a sort of 15 to 20 year process.
Wow. Do you see that speeding up anytime soon, just like our vaccination progress for COVID-19?
You've absolutely nailed it. Yeah. So, how can you take the sort of genetic and the phenotype data from your existing experiments and your existing...
to speed things up.
And then, sort of run that effectively in a virtual simulation, if you like, of experiments to test that out. So those were some of the things we were looking at. We were also looking at, sort of using AI, so facial recognition for animals, for example. So, all animals from an agricultural point of view have to walk around with a tag in their ear for identification purposes. But in the same way as you've now got sort of facial recognition and visual recognition of humans, that technology can be sort of transferred to animals as well. So that's another use case. Mm-hmm. And so the other obvious one is counting with a camera, and so huge number of use cases where sort of manually needing to count the number of grapes on your vine, for example, to be able to predict this year's yield. You can now just do that with a camera.
Wow, and to measure that output right to the last grape and the very first grape. Absolutely. That's amazing. And what are some of the successes that you've enjoyed in your career to date?
A number of successes. I tend not to sort of shout them out too much, but I work with a number of businesses. One of the other roles I've got is I've been involved in the sort of early stage investment ecosystem here, sort of angel investment space, and so. Which someone did say to me the other day is, the aim of an angel investor isn't really return on capital, but return of capital. But so there's a degree of philanthropy, but it's a really exciting space to work in, just to see sort of young entrepreneurs coming through, with, innovative ideas, perhaps not the greatest understanding of sales, or perhaps not the greatest understanding of technology, and just to be able to sort of put them together with people that have got experience of that.
Because these days,
in
these times, you can't just have or rely on technologists to get products and services to market. It's involving everyone, and the teams are quite varied.
Yes, and in my experience, you need a surplus of marketers more than technologists, from a commercial point of view. Yeah,
that's correct, probably.
I get really quite excited about the technology business in our part of the world. South Pacific here and in Australia as well, where there's so many innovative entrepreneurs here, and I think the region has traditionally suffered from a lack of venture capital.
That's absolutely true, but it is it's picking up in Australia and probably
and here,
over say the last 5 years, but before that, and it's a shame because it never had to be like that. But often the society and the governments and the funding are just way behind the times, and they're not looking at now and the future. So, but now, I suppose we're picking up some speed.
It's opening up, and so some of my successes are definitely when companies that I'm working with alongside have raised capital. That's happened a few times, and just recently we in our business I've been advising, they've just sold their software business into a larger business, and so those I think I'm really quite passionate about the business of technology. And it's quite exciting when in our region here, where we're a long way away from the US, we're a long way from China, but people are able to build sort of global businesses from wherever. And we were talking about distributed teams, and so so why do we need to have teams that are based in one place? Why can't we sort of hire the right people from wherever in the world? So successes. I think. What drives me, I think, is really just to the businesses that I'm working with, the entrepreneurs I'm working with, in that startup space is definitely when they have a business success that they can trace back to maybe some technology decisions that they made.
Earlier on, and because every step counts to the destination, and it is a journey. So, in terms of New Zealand, what are some tech companies that really stand out in terms of a global ecosystem and market?
Well, so the biggest tech company here is an accounting software firm called Xero, Xero, which, and I haven't looked at the share price recently, but it's one of the world's 3 biggest financial software, for small business accounting software providers, and that's spawned this software as a service, what we call SaaS, ecosystem. So there are lots of SaaS businesses here that have, I think, been inspired by what the founder of Xero, was a guy called Rob Drury, has achieved with that. So there's companies like Vend, which is similar, which is sort of point of sale software. So I think what we tend to do well here is business to business software, rather than B2C, because we don't have a huge number of consumers, on our doorstep.
No, we probably don't understand the markets, and in terms of distribution, often companies that want to roll out globally do need local workforce.
Yeah, completely.
And we just don't understand probably the cultures enough. Not all companies.
You're completely right. Although recently, just the success of TikTok is, again, just another example of how AI helps to bridge that kind of gap. So, TikTok was a bunch of, mainly Chinese and Indian developers who were able to launch into, the West just purely by iterating their engagement algorithm. So not really understanding much about the cultures of the countries that they were operating in, but just basically just studying user behavior.
Then of course it's really machine learning. That's also, but humans organising the machine learning to organise the algorithms, and of course also can't compare all industries or all products and services. And relatively speaking, TikTok's quite simple.
I mean, their algorithm is the secret sauce, right? And so all this nonsense that's been happening in the US, where they've been trying to sell their US unit. The unit would be a shell because the actual secret sauce is the underlying algorithm.
And the algorithm, it's probably, the algorithm is powerful, but then I suppose a lot of machine learning went into developing and further developing that algorithm or algorithms. And I suppose it's really the data, isn't it? It's the data collection and what that algorithm equals in terms of what data is collected. Yeah,
so the really successful data-driven tech companies, so Facebook, Google, TikTok themselves, Tencent in China, they have established what we call a sort of virtual circle of gathering user data, deriving insights and training their models, into improved algorithms, and just continually, but then feed back into user behavior, which then gives more user data to feed into the machine, and they can scale that up across the millions or billions of users. I mean, Facebook's 3 billion users now. I think it's very hard to remember the exact number. Give or take a billion. They're just collecting vast amounts of user behavior data, which gives them granular insights, and also
a sort of product service to sell on. I mean, that's a business in itself. And so you were an executive director of the AI Forum in New Zealand. So can you let us know what that was about and what sort of directives came from that?
Yeah, Alex, so that was I did that from 2017 just to the end of last year. And that was a really fascinating role. So, I think back in 2016, a number of us was sort of seeing that the AI was really becoming a key competitive differentiator, I think, for economies and for businesses. And we were starting to see some really quite exciting companies coming out of AI research here in New Zealand and in the region. Just for example, there's a company called Cell Machines, which came out of Auckland University's AI research department, and they are creating what they call virtual humans, which is like a 3D animated head, photorealistic head of a person that you can have a conversation with face to face. And all sorts of applications for this in terms of customer service, and I think they're working in sort of automotive as well. So
and recently, so this will be physically and not just on a computer screen. Is that right? It'll be like a robot head.
At the moment, they're just animated.
Okay, so on the screen.
But I think the AI piece of it is the brain behind it, where you're able to have a natural, flowing conversation, and still a way to go in the technology there, but it leads to whole new use cases, especially in those virtual worlds we were talking about earlier.
That's right, and recently, I saw one recently actually, and it was linked with some people discussing, health, especially mental health, and whether or not these sort of talking bot heads could be useful at this stage. And it's pretty mixed, I suppose. It depends on who's on the other end, because there may be very little engagement, or in fact, it could be of no benefit at all.
Look, I'm 100% with you there. I think it's still. Again, just talking what we were saying about marketing, trying to find the actual demand there. But often with these technologies, they sometimes take a few years of, proving out, and over that time, they're sort of improving on a sort of exponential scale. And then all of a sudden, this conversation we're having right now, potentially one of us could be a bot, right? And the people listening in would struggle to tell the difference. I mean, and you're seeing
and that could be
an
ethical problem, couldn't it? Yeah, there's a lot of music and musicians, that's really developing like that. And it could be more difficult to tell who's human and who's not, and that might have ethical consequences and things to
Yeah,
flag.
it absolutely does. And just going back to the AI forum,
Because the
so
bot
that was,
won't bleed,
yeah.
will it? But the human being will. And so if a human being's programmed the bot to be absolutely to the end ruthless, but the bot doesn't bleed, but the human does, yeah, we could be in trouble, right?
Yeah, and that goes again back to my sort of potentially blasé, but a little bit more sanguine view on the technological evolution. So, I think now that anybody that gets a robocall, is pretty skeptical. When someone says, you may, you've got a problem with your Windows machine. Tell us your password. Increasingly people are a bit wise to that, and there's ways of protecting against. I guess basically it's the ways of hacking the brain, right?
That's right. And I
so
think,
we've evolved over billions of years with a sort of like a lizard brain at the base of it, and then only very recently having a sort of rational neocortex wrapped around it. And we've still got so many instincts and emotional impulses that can be manipulated, and so I think technology can be used in that way.
So what were the main initiatives that came out of the AI forum?
Yeah, so once we established it, so the group was really to drive cohesion, I guess, we had a really diverse ecosystem of AI startups. We had some global technology companies that came to invest and had various AI technologies as well to use. Obviously, government is a player, and so from an R&D perspective, but increasingly as a core capability of the economy. And so we were, and then the universities, the researchers themselves.
That's right. And I suppose there are like directives for all the different divisions, and there was white paper published, and that goes on, and that's monitored, and that's set in motion. And of course, I suppose in there are directives for constant revision. Yeah,
and we were seeing China in particular, but the US got around to it eventually, and countries like Singapore as well, were really investing in national AI strategies. So the UK as well we're putting billions of pounds into AI research and development, and then AI commercialization, and education as well. So one of the things I just put out in today, in South Korea, that next year all high school students will start being taught AI, and then they're going to start pushing that down to primary school, in the next couple of years as well. So, if we really want, the next generation of our workforce to be working in these knowledge-intensive roles and jobs, then the education, starting to include this in the education system, I think is
absolutely paramount. Yeah, we haven't got much time left, but what advice would you give to startups, today, for global product and services, or just really good national products and services? What would you say?
So I think aim globally into a very deep niche. So find find us a very deep problem, very painful problem for a market of customers, and work really, really closely with early adopters there to solve the problem for them, and then out of that there's conventional ways of scaling that up, to reach a global audience now. Certainly for non-physical devices. So that's not so much for hardware startups, but definitely for software and AI startups. Is you can do this from anywhere to anywhere. With some national boundaries, obviously. Exporting to China, exporting software into China is a challenge now with completely different sort of cloud ecosystem and software ecosystem there, and also obviously with the Great Firewall makes it a bit of a challenge. But certainly into for New Zealand and Australian startups looking to go into the US and into Europe and South America and beyond, Middle East, there are basically find the people who've got a really pressing problem that you can solve, and that you have empathy with. I think, increasingly, people aren't in the software business, but they're actually in their client's business, and they just happen to be writing software that's going to help solve those problems.
That's true. Well, thanks so much, and Ben, for being on the show, and we'll catch up with you another time. Thank you.